No azul profundo do Atlântico, entre dois continentes, entre tempos, línguas e sotaques, existem redes que de forma invisível, mas indestrutível, nos unem. Não se vêem no mapa, leem-se na memória dos que as constroem, irradiam da ação dos que as mantêm vivas. São feitas de histórias, de encontros, de vontade, de raízes fundas e ramos que se multiplicam para o futuro. São redes humanas, vivas, pulsantes, que aproximam cidades, comunidades, gerações. É nesse espírito que nasce o trabalho da FLAD, a Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, que há 40 anos constrói pontes sobre o Atlântico, promove o diálogo, o conhecimento, o encontro e, sobretudo, acredita nas pessoas como motor de mudança. Com essa visão, associámo-nos ao Governo dos Açores para realizar aqui, nos Açores, precisamente a meio caminho entre Portugal continental e os Estados Unidos da América, um encontro decisivo para pensar e transformar as cidades. Um momento de visão partilhada e orientação estratégica. Um espaço para reunir decisores, especialistas, criadores e cidadãos em torno de um objetivo comum: redesenhar os espaços urbanos para os desafios do século XXI. Porque uma ligação não é apenas um gesto simbólico, é um compromisso. É acreditar que podemos fazer mais e melhor juntos. As Sister Cities são isso mesmo. Laços que unem o que está longe e que tornam próximo o distante. Cidades com histórias diferentes, mas com a mesma vontade de partilhar saberes, desafios e soluções. De Tolar a Angra do Heroísmo, de Fall River a Ponta Delgada, da Ribeira Grande a East Providence, de Cambridge a Coimbra. Estes laços não vivem no papel, vivem nas pessoas e nos projetos, nos alunos que partilham experiências, nos artistas que se descobrem na diferença, nos autarcas que acreditam na cooperação, nos cidadãos que fazem destas pontes uma via de dois sentidos. Cada gesto conta, cada encontro semeia algo, e é dessa rede feita por todos que nascem os projetos que transformam o presente. O futuro não se constrói sozinho. É nas mãos de quem age, de quem participa, de quem se compromete, que ele toma forma. Estas ligações pedem continuidade, pedem presença, pedem empenho e paixão, porque pertencer não é apenas recordar quem somos. É escolher todos os dias fazer parte de algo maior. É estar presente, é deixar marca, é dar o próximo passo. São redes que unem, que começam aqui e que começam em nós, com todos nós.
Em nome de Sua Excelência, o Presidente da República, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, declaro aberta a conferência de encerramento do Sister City Summit. Foi Presidente da Comissão Europeia durante 2 mandatos, entre 2004 e 2014, e Primeiro-Ministro de Portugal, tendo desempenhado funções durante 12 anos em cargos como Ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros, Secretário de Estado dos Assuntos Externos e da Cooperação e Secretário de Estado da Administração Interna. Foi professor visitante nas universidades de Georgetown, Princeton e no Instituto dos Estudos Internacionais de Genebra. Atualmente, é professor residente na Universidade Católica Portuguesa, onde dirige o Centro de Estudos Europeus, e no Instituto Universitário Europeu em Florença. É também investigador não residente em Princeton, membro do Conselho Consultivo do Liechtenstein Institute. Licenciado em Direito pela Universidade de Lisboa, mestre em Ciência Política pela Universidade de Genebra e pós-graduado em Estudos Europeus. Exerce atualmente funções como Presidente do Conselho Internacional de Assessores do Goldman Sachs e Presidente da Gavi, da Vaccine Alliance. Senhoras e senhores, convosco, José Manuel Durão Barroso.
Senhor Presidente da República, Excelência, Senhor Presidente da Assembleia Legislativa dos Açores, Senhor Presidente do Governo Regional, Senhores Deputados e Senhores membros do Governo Regional, Senhor Presidente da Câmara Municipal Ponta Delgada, e na sua pessoa cumprimento todos os autarcas, não só os autarcas portugueses, mas também os autarcas dos Estados Unidos que hoje nos visitam, Senhora Presidente da Secção Regional do Tribunal de Contas, Senhor Embaixador de Portugal nos Estados Unidos, Senhora Cônsul dos Estados Unidos nos Açores, demais autoridades, militares, segurança, claro está a Senhora Reitora que nos recebe aqui na sua casa, nesta belíssima Universidade dos Açores, e meu caro amigo, Presidente da FLAD, também a quem tenho que agradecer o convite para estar hoje aqui convosco. É uma situação um bocadinho embaraçosa aquela, porque acabo de saber que o Presidente da República me dá a honra de me vir ouvir. Isto começou em 1973, quando eu era aluno do professor Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, na altura, ele próprio, um jovem assistente na Faculdade de Direito de Lisboa, em que era eu que ia ouvi-lo. De maneira que, Sr. Presidente, peço desculpa. A culpa não foi minha na organização. Vai ter que me ouvir um pouco, porque, ainda por cima, a organização desta Sister Summit, Sister City Summit, reservou uma hora que me parece excessivo para a minha intervenção, embora haja sempre o problema e o risco quando se convida um político ou um ex-político para falar, que ele fale mesmo. E eu vou tentar, apesar de tudo, não ocupar todo esse tempo. Começarei por fazer algumas considerações em português, mas depois também por uma questão de hospitalidade em relação aos convidados que vieram dos Estados Unidos. Se me permitem, nomeadamente em algumas considerações geopolíticas que vou fazer, falarei em inglês. Mas queria começar por sublinhar um ponto que é precisamente aquele pretexto que nos une aqui hoje. Estamos a celebrar os 40 anos da FLAD, da Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento. Uma instituição tão importante, aquilo que já fez, aquilo que faz e aquilo que fará para as relações entre Portugal e os Estados Unidos. Muitos de nós, e digo nós porque eu sou um caso concreto disso, já beneficiámos da FLAD. Eu fui para os Estados Unidos como uma bolsa, como professor convidado da Universidade de Georgetown, salvo erro, em 1996, exatamente, depois de ter sido Ministro dos Negócios Estrangeiros aqui em Portugal, com o apoio do Dr. Rui Machete, então Presidente da FLAD. Nós criámos um programa, aliás, eu fui o primeiro que pude beneficiar dele, um programa de Visiting Professorship na School of Government, na altura, e no Foreign Policy, na School of Foreign Service, da Universidade de Georgetown, onde passei, aliás, 4 semestres académicos, podendo assim ter um contacto direto com a riqueza académica, científica desse grande país que são os Estados Unidos da América. Estou a citar isto apenas como um exemplo, mas depois disso houve muitos outros que beneficiaram desse programa e há imensa coisa que com certeza estão ao corrente que a FLAD tem feito, não apenas no domínio académico, científico, técnico, mas também, como hoje aqui, no domínio dos contactos humanos, das relações entre Portugal e os Estados Unidos. Porque as relações não são apenas políticas, não são apenas de segurança, não são apenas económicas, são também académicas e científicas e são também relações humanas. É também de pessoas que falamos quando falamos das relações entre os Estados Unidos e Portugal, e já agora também, porque não dizer, entre os Estados Unidos e a Europa. Essa era a primeira palavra que queria ter para com a FLAD, dando ao meu querido amigo Nuno Moraes Charmente, seu Presidente, os meus sinceros parabéns por este aniversário da instituição que ele tão competentemente dirige. A minha segunda palavra é para os Açores. Gosto sempre imenso de vir aos Açores e tenho, aliás, muita ligação aos Açores, desde logo, talvez alguns já não se lembrem, por ter sido eu quem assinou, quem negociou e assinou o Acordo de Cooperação e Defesa com os Estados Unidos da América do Norte, que foi o acordo que está válido, que foi assinado dia 1 de junho de 1995. Portanto, quase dia por dia, já passaram 30 anos desse acordo, que é o acordo que define as condições de utilização da base das lajes pelos Estados Unidos. É um acordo que também inclui uma parte laboral e que inclui também o princípio da cooperação científica e técnica, que substituiu o antigo regime, que era um regime de contrapartidas financeiras diretas. Assinei esse acordo dia 1 de junho de 95 com alguém que já não está entre nós, o então secretário de Estado norte-americano Warren Christopher. Portanto, este ano temos muitos aniversários para festejar, os 30 anos da FLAD, os 40 anos da FLAD, os 30 anos do Acordo de Cooperação e Defesa Estados Unidos Portugal e também, por que não dizê-lo, como há poucos dias fizemos em Lisboa, os 40 anos da adesão de Portugal, ou da assinatura do Tratado de Adesão de Portugal à então Comunidade Europeia. Mas, falando sobre os Açores, de facto, os Açores são uma verdadeira expressão, a expressão física, geográfica, mas também a expressão humana desta cumplicidade entre Portugal e os Estados Unidos. E não apenas entre Portugal, eu diria também entre a Europa e os Estados Unidos. Porque quando hoje se fala dos riscos, já falarei sobre isso com mais algum detalhe, dos riscos geopolíticos, das ameaças à nossa segurança, e quando hoje em dia também se reequaciona o sistema de segurança euroatlântico e ocidental, fala-se cada vez mais de uma atenção mais concentrada na zona leste da Europa, e por razões evidentes, tem a ver com a agressão da Rússia contra a Ucrânia, mas a verdade é que, como a própria NATO admite na sua doutrina, a segurança é indivisível e, por isso, estão errados aqueles que pensam que diminuiu o valor estratégico dos Açores ou diminuiu o valor estratégico da própria base das lajes. A verdade é que, num cenário em que os riscos, infelizmente, aumentam, num cenário em que, infelizmente, aumenta a probabilidade de conflitos armados em toda esta região, a verdade é que qualquer situação dessas leva a que aumente também o valor geoestratégico dos Açores e também do Ocidente. Eu espero que a Europa não se esqueça disto. Eu espero que a Europa não se esqueça que a segurança é indivisível, que não podemos estar só a olhar para leste, embora realmente hoje haja uma questão existencial e de urgência em relação à fronteira leste da NATO, mas a verdade é que a segurança sendo indivisível, nós temos de considerar riscos que podem vir do Sul e também temos de considerar o espaço euroatlântico em toda a sua diversidade e toda a sua relevância. Os Açores são a melhor expressão dessa dimensão atlântica. Nós, aliás, temos visto isso sublinhado, quero dizê-lo também pelo Sr. Presidente do Governo Regional, a quem também quero felicitar, muito sinceramente. Tenho verificado, para além da qualidade do Governo aqui nos Açores e tudo que tem sido feito pelas autoridades dos Açores, tenho verificado a sua atenção na redefinição do posicionamento dos Açores, não apenas nas questões euroatlânticas, não apenas na relação com as comunidades, nomeadamente comunidades de origem açoriana nos Estados Unidos, que são tão importantes e com as quais eu também contactei tantas vezes, desde a costa leste até à Califórnia, até ao Hawaii. Lembro perfeitamente de uma visita que fiz ao Hawaii, na altura com o nosso cônsul honorário, infelizmente já desaparecido, John Felix. Falei várias vezes, aliás, com o Presidente Obama, quando ele era Presidente dos Estados Unidos e eu era Presidente da Comissão, falámos muitas vezes sobre o Hawaii e a comunidade portuguesa no Hawaii, que ele conhecia relativamente bem. E a verdade é que, para além destas comunidades, o Sr. Presidente do Governo Regional tem procurado valorizar a posição geoestratégica dos Açores, não apenas no domínio do mar, o que é uma evidência, não vou repetir aquilo que sempre se diz sobre o mar, mas também em termos até do espaço aéreo de toda esta região e até na vocação que os Açores podem ter para algumas ações no espaço mais vasto, nomeadamente do ponto de vista de satélites e de outros pontos de vista ligados à ciência espacial. É importante esta afirmação dos Açores. Quero também, aliás, felicitar em geral as autoridades dos Açores e o povo açoriano pelo notável progresso que os Açores têm tido ao longo das décadas. Eu próprio sou testemunha disso, mas melhor que ninguém os açorianos sabem o que eram os Açores antes do 25 de Abril, quando os Açores, aliás, como a Madeira, eram considerados ilhas adjacentes. Era assim que se referia, então, o discurso oficial aos Açores. Não eram regiões autónomas, eram ilhas adjacentes. A minha geração foi assim que aprendeu na escola primária. Havia Portugal continental, ilhas adjacentes e províncias ultramarinas. Ora, não são os Açores não estão adjacentes, os Açores valem por si próprios, como a Madeira vale por si própria. E foi o 25 de abril de 74 que permitiu a autonomia regional democrática e foi também, por que não dizê-lo, a adesão à União Europeia que permitiu um maior apoio ao crescimento e ao desenvolvimento económico, social e cultural dos Açores, assim como da Madeira. Por isso eu queria também aproveitando esta oportunidade que me dão de vos falar, de dizer como admiro o trabalho que ao longo de tantas décadas foi feito aqui nos Açores, pelos sucessivos governos e pelo povo açoriano, que hoje em dia, obviamente, estão com um nível de desenvolvimento muito superior àquele que tinham há algumas décadas atrás. Mas, repito, temos que colocar isto no contexto europeu e no contexto mais geral dos desafios geopolíticos. And now, if you allow me, I will switch to English, also because I'm more used to use the English when I deal with geopolitical risks and geopolitical developments and international situation. And I'd like to start by making very general comments about geopolitical situation and then more concretely about the transatlantic relationships. The advantage of no longer being in politics, I'm no longer in public office, so is that my sincerity is increasing day by day. So I'm not representing here the government that I fully support, or the European Union that I fully support, or the European Commission. I'm only representing myself. Of course, I may be biased. I'm biased pro-European, and I'm biased pro-the United States. I'm an Atlanticist, so I may be biased, but these are the opinions of someone who now has the freedom to express its opinions without being representing any specific institution. And that's why I like to start by saying that one obvious thing, we are living, of course, very dangerous times, a very fragmented, polarized global situation. And this is not so new. It comes from a global power competition between the United States and China. It comes also from the pandemic has exacerbated some of the trends in terms of the economic developments, in terms of reorganization of the supply chains, a much more strong emphasis on issues of security, economic security, instead of economic efficiency. So some rise of protectionism, the idea that free trade should not necessarily win, as it was consideration before, but that the governments should put more attention to their resilience, so resilience being more important than efficiency, that they should put more focus on the development of friendly onshoring or friendly supply chains, and that's, of course, has some impact in terms of trade, and also some situations that were, I believe, determined, namely by something I consider of historic decisive importance. It was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I think the world will never be the same. And I've said it since the moment of that invasion. And because it's not just about Ukraine. It's about Europe, but not just about Europe. It's about the world. It became an internationalized conflict. If Mr. Putin wins, the West, including the United States, would lose. It's not just about Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine being a very important country, more or less the size of France. So, and we are in the global world where the so-called global South is looking at us. And for the global South, sometimes there is no difference between Europeans or even the Europeans and the Americans. It's the so-called global North or the West. And so if we lose, it will be, of course, dramatic for the capacity to defend our values and to protect our interests. And in fact, it became an internationalized conflict. Now we have North Korean troops in the middle of Europe. We had until recently Iran supplying weapons, including very important weapons like drones, to the government of Mr. Putin in Russia. So in fact, we have an internationalized conflict with ramifications because the conflict has had impact on food security, on the prices of gas, and other kinds of resources. And of course, there has been also the so-called friendship without limits between China and Russia, something new. Since 1956, when there was the rupture in the international communist movement, there was never such a moment of convergence between Russia and China as we have now. So this is a complete different situation. And it is a complete illusion to think that we are going to come back to normal or business as usual. We are not going to come back to that situation. That's why there is today, and rightly so, such an interest and an attention to defense, to security, including, of course, about the transatlantic alliance, that in my view remains by far the most important security alliance in the world and also in history. This is in that context that we should consider the developments of the transatlantic relationship. Now, as I told you, I think I can speak with some degree of freedom, and I'm going to be very honest with you. The transatlantic relationship is going through a very difficult phase. We saw and we see some stress that I don't remember, at least in the last decades, between the United States and European partners. There are some issues of trust that came recently. So adding to the already very complex, very dangerous, fragmented and polarized situation, now we have also a situation of some uncertainty, uncertainty being the new name of the game. So the election of President Trump, and I have to say that with all the respect, of course, we owe to the elected President of the United States, has added uncertainty. And where we find that uncertainty? In some levels of the relationship. Not only the economic, including trade relationship, but also in terms of security relationship, and also about Ukraine. Now, there is some comments made by the new President of the United States, in fact, the second mandate of the President Trump. We saw that more emphasis on interests than on values. And that is important because to some extent before, when we were speaking about Europe and the United States, we were speaking more about values, shared values, freedom, democracy, and overall what we usually call the values of liberal democracy and our complicity around those values. President Trump has introduced more attention to interests and transactional interests. So the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to develop our relationship based on the complicity of interests or complicity of values, Are we going to follow the relationship supported in our complicity of values or transaction of interests? Probably we have to do both. Let's be honest. Countries have different interests sometimes, including in Europe, by the way, including sometimes in our own countries. Those who are in positions of power know very well that we have to arbitrate between sometimes contradictory interests, and there is competition on our countries, in democratic countries. There is also competition in Europe between different countries. There is competition, why not, between the United States and Europe, and others as well. So, but the question is, what is the goal? What is the spirit of this cooperation between the United States and Europe? Is it just about interests? Or values should remain at the core of our relationship? This is the important question I believe it's raised. And I believe at the beginning of this new administration, there were some very serious issues about trust. Some comments made by the United States side were, for instance, extremely negative about the European Union, including the fact that the European Union had been created, I'm not going to use the expression used then, but to make life difficult for the United States. That was said. And that's simply not true. The European community, as it was known at that time, was created after the Second World War to a large extent by American initiative. It were men of great vision, including Marshall, the famous Marshall Plan, and others, great American diplomats, great American statesmen, that instead of betting in a Europe that was destroyed. Europe was destroyed after the Second World War. The most important countries of Europe have been destroyed by that war, including the winners, the so-called winners. And instead of supporting that idea that we can take benefit of this, the Americans decided, let's help Europe to rebuild, to regain again its force. Certainly, it was also in the self-interest of the United States was to contain communism coming from the Soviet Union. But anyhow, the United States were extremely generous, supporting Europe through the Marshall Plan and other instruments, and indeed not only supporting economically, but supporting politically. At that time, the official position of the government of the United States was always in favor of European integration since the beginning. Since the beginning. Supporting, for instance, the UK, when the UK became a member of the European community. And on the European side, and this sometimes is not known, or at least people don't remember that very well, the founding fathers of the European community, like Konrad Adenauer in Germany, Robert Schuman in France, Jean Monnet, probably the greatest genius of the European integration, that in fact during the Second World War, he was in the United States. He was one of the leaders of the so-called Victory Program for the defense industry of the United States. So Konrad Adenauer, Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, and Alcide de Gasperi in Italy, all those were Atlanticists. They were deep friends and very close friends of the United States of America. So the reason why the European Union was created was not to create difficulties to the United States. It was exactly in terms of complicity about the same values, to contain the threat that were coming from the East, and also to create a space of freedom and not only political freedom, but also economic freedom and prosperity. And it worked. As you know, it was the golden age of Europe, and Europe was growing, and of course, and that was not detrimental to the United States. On the contrary, it was good for the United States, it was good for trade, very good, in fact, also for investment. So this is an important point. Some people say, oh, don't care, it does not matter what people say, it just matters what people do. I don't agree. In politics, words count. And it is important to address this issue because it may hurt our feelings and it may create problems of mistrust. The second point that was difficult was, in fact, some doubts about the future of NATO. And also some doubts about the support to Ukraine. About NATO, there were pressure saying that Europeans should do more. I agree, by the way. I agree that Europeans should do more. And in fact, that is a point that was constantly made by different presidents of the United States. I remember, as a very young deputy foreign minister, I remember already with President Clinton, but President George W. Bush, President Obama. All the presidents of the United States have been saying for decades that Europe should do more for their own defense. Only now, and that is in fact due to President Trump, that was possible in a decisive way. And I believe from that point of view, the last summit of NATO last week was certainly a success, committing to the 3.5 in core defense investment, but also the 5% in defense or security-related expenditure. Although I have some doubts, honestly, about the way to achieve those goals, let's say, in the medium term. Anyhow, from the point of view of the commitment, I think it was extremely good that we had this renewed commitment to NATO. And I think I can say today that NATO remains by far the most successful defense alliance in history. And we should keep it. Because it's in our interest, certainly. And I say not only Europeans, but North Americans, and including, of course, United States and Canada. So from that point of view, it was great that we came to that decision recently, the heads of state and government of the NATO members. And also that there was a reaffirmation in ironclad terms of the credibility of Article 5, or Article, as you know, it's Article of Common Defense between the NATO partners, but also a commitment also to invest more in our common defense. That was certainly a very important point. In fact, contrary to what I sometimes hear, NATO has been reinforced even before this summit. We have seen not only the increase of expenditure, but we have seen, for instance, Finland and Sweden joining NATO. That was unthinkable. Not only, before the invasion of Ukraine, not only that was not possible, it was unthinkable. And now, Russia, in fact, has in the border a country that is much bigger. It's the biggest border that Russia has with Europe is not Ukraine, it's Finland, a very important member of our alliance, by the way, a very important member of the European Union, and Sweden as well. So, in fact, Mr. Putin has given a great contribution to make NATO great again. In fact, NATO has been reinforced in operational capabilities, in investment, and also in geographical. So if the goal of Mr. Putin was, because of Ukraine, invading Ukraine, to avoid NATO to be too close to him, in fact, he has got exactly the opposite result. Today, NATO is stronger and closer to Russia than it was before. But it was a response. Let's put it, we cannot treat these matters in terms of moral equivalence, because there is a difference. When people say there is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, sorry, there is a difference between the aggressor and the aggressed. It was not Ukraine that invaded Russia, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine. And I remember well because it started, I was still in the European Commission, 2014, when started the invasion of Crimea. And I already made this public and I can share it with you as well. It was in 2014, the first news came of the invasion, and I called President Putin. Because at that time we had a very, let's say, close relationship, not only Europeans, the Americans as well. And we were meeting President Putin. We were meeting, President Putin was the leader outside the European Union I met the most during those 10 years in the European Commission. Because at that time we had twice a year a summit with Russia. And because it was the only partner that was coming from Europe, even not from the European Union. In fact, according to my office, when I left, I counted 25 meetings I had with President Putin. I'm not very proud of that, but that's the reality. And then I asked him, we called each other in first name basis. I called him Vladimir, he calls me José Manuel, and I said, what's going on? And I'm telling that story for you to understand what kind of person Mr. Putin is. He said, this is not an invasion of the Russian army. These are some Russians that are there, close to Crimea. You know, they have some relatives, they have some cousins, some friends, some tourists. And the people that are in Crimea, they ask for help because the Ukrainians are attacking them. But I can tell you, José Manuel, he said, I can tell you that if it was the Russian army, we would take Kiev in less than 2 weeks. That's what he said. And of course, there were people taking notes of our conversation. I felt that I should inform the European Council, so the summit of heads of state and government of the European Union, it was just some days afterwards. It was, of course, shared in full confidence. This is that dinner where we only have the so-called leaders, we don't have the staff, we don't have the diplomats, we have the heads of state and government. And the following day, there was a leak. I'm not going to say who made the leak, but it appeared in La Repubblica in Italy. and afterwards, the Kremlin, they were angry about that leak, but they did not deny it. They just said that what appeared out of context. So, but I'm telling that story because I think it is important. Already in 2014, the idea of Mr. Putin was that he could take Kiev in less than 2 weeks. Why didn't he try to do it not in 2014, but he tried to do it now, 3 years ago? Why? I think for several reasons. First, because he increased the control of Russia through repression. At that time, there was still some form of democracy in Russia. Now it's, of course, a complete authoritarian state, killing, in fact, the leader of the opposition. And he felt that Russia was stronger after Syria and that the United States and the West were weaker after Afghanistan. That's why now he felt he could take Ukraine. Not only Donbass, not only distant part of Ukraine. The goal of Mr. Putin is not just to take some land, and that's a mistake that some people make. The goal of Mr. Putin is to not allow Ukraine to be an independent sovereign country. You'd like to have Ukraine, maybe he could accept formal independence like Belarus, but in fact controlling the foreign policy and defense of that country. Because as he sees it, and we spoke about this several times, he thinks that the biggest humiliation for Russia was not the fall of communism, but it was the national humiliation of Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed and the fact that many Russians had to live outside Mother Russia. So for him, the important goal is, in fact, to put back Ukraine in the so-called Russian space. And we have to understand that, because if you don't understand this, you understand nothing of what's happening now in that region. And this is why I think we should not be naive. The same way Russia will not take, and they have not taken Ukraine in less than 2 weeks, it was not possible to achieve peace between Ukraine and Russia in less than 24 hours. It takes more time, as we see. Having said that, of course, we welcome all the efforts of the President of the United States to reach an agreement there, because it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the people of Ukraine, also for the people of Russia. There are so many casualties that it could be avoided. It will be great if we have at least some kind of truce or some kind of ceasefire, of separation of forces. I don't believe in the foreseeable future to have a true peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. I don't believe. Knowing Russia and knowing Ukraine, I don't think it's possible, because they see it as a zero-sum game and the level of hate and mistrust is too high. But maybe it is possible, and I think we should work for it. And in that case, that's why I really welcome the efforts of the American president to do something for that. But without illusions, I think it's possible to have some kind of ceasefire with some guarantees that would at least avoid, so many people, so many young people from Ukraine and Russia dying every day here in Europe, as we are seeing every day. Now, from that point of view, I also welcome the recent positions of President Trump. It seems to me that President Trump now is taking a more realistic position, and that, in fact, if we do it together, the United States and Europe, we can put the necessary pressure, the pressure that President Trump has put now in the other parties in the Middle East, at least for now, with some success. We could use it together to try to have some constructive developments for the Ukraine situation. So I think there are these differences, but there are positive developments. A difficult issue, but I'm not going to take it because it's somehow a little bit more technical, is about trade. Trade, unfortunately, the situation is not yet clear. The United States and Europe relationship remain by far the most important economic relationship when you consider not only trade in goods, but also the trade in services and investment. It's more important than US-China or more important than Europe-China. This is the most important global economic relationship, if you add all the figures. Sometimes in the statistics in the media that does not appear because it puts country by country. And so, of course, there are other countries but if you put together the European Union, and for trade what you should count is the European Union, it is by far the most important relationship. So I hope that there will be an agreement. The latest news are not very encouraging, to be honest. Apparently, the negotiators are still far from a compromise. And as you know, there is that date of beginning of July now, 9th of July, if I remember correctly. And it will be important because it's very difficult in the current situation to separate issues of trade and investment from security and overall political relationship. If we speak about that complicity, if we believe that we have to protect our interests and our values, I think we should, of course, do it in the spirit of compromise, to find a solution, because the world will not believe that we are really united in NATO, that we are really united to protect our interests and our values when there will be a public row and a very big polarization about trade. So I hope that there will be some progress soon in the finding a solution that could be constructive. I think there are some possibilities of a compromise in the trade relationship between the US and the European Union in general. Now, a final word about Europe. I'm one of those that thinks that we should not explain our own difficulties because of others. That's why by the way, I wrote immediately an article after the election of President Trump saying that the election of President Trump should be seen, in fact, as a great opportunity for Europe. And I really mean it. To some extent, it's already been the case. Because Europeans are now seeing that they have to do more for their own defense. As I've been saying, the Europeans now came to a time where they believe they should no longer be a geopolitical teenager. We cannot be like those teenagers that don't want to leave the house of their parents. No, we have to. We have to assume our own responsibilities, certainly in the framework of the NATO, transatlantic relationship, but also doing more for European defense as the pillar of transatlantic security. So from that point of view, President Trump has already helped Europe in terms of this wake-up call that he made, that Europe should do more for defense. That is certainly an important case. The other point is economically. Because let's be honest, it's not because of the current American president or because of the United States that Europe is losing competitiveness when you compare with the United States, but also with China. In fact, we are losing competitiveness. We are doing much less than the Americans or China are doing, for instance, new technologies like AI, artificial intelligence. So this is the moment for the Europeans to do their own homework and stop blaming others. A lot depends on us. Why have you not yet completed the internal market and services? Why don't we have a capital markets union? We have 27 capital markets. Some time ago, I was in a conference, and it was in Hong Kong, and someone asked me, why the Europeans don't have a capital markets union, and we have 27 markets? And my answer was very spontaneous, was because in Europe, some politicians don't like capital, others don't like markets, others don't like union. That's maybe the reason why we don't have a capital markets union. But we need the scale of the European Union to market, because our companies, when they want to grow, they go. Sometimes ago they were going to London, or now they go to the United States, because there is not the depth of, in Europe, there is not the depth of capital that you have in the great capital markets of the United States. It remains, by the way, the most important financial center in the world. So we have to understand that. This is on our hands, and we can do it. So not only capital markets union, the internal market in services, but also investments in technology and other things. By the way, most of them are in fact presented in the so-called Draghi report that now is somehow one of the, let's say, guidelines for the European Commission and European Union member states' action. I believe there is some progress on that matter. So let's stop blaming each other. Let's stop blaming each other. And let's do what we can do, both on the European side, on the American side, to improve the competitiveness of our economies and also to achieve more prosperity for our respective peoples. Let's do it honestly, assuming the differences when the differences exist, but working as long as possible with this idea of engagement. I know the United States, as I've said before. I spent there 4 years with my family at Georgetown and Princeton. I have a great admiration for the United States of America, for the richness of its society, for the dynamism, the entrepreneur spirit of the society, for the growth mindset, innovation that we see in that society. So we have to engage not only the American president, certainly, but with the Congress, with the different parties, with the universities, with the business, with the corporation, with the towns, and that's why we are here in a summit about sister cities. And you say sister. Now I'm not going to enter in discussions about gender. We can say sister or brother, I don't know. I don't want on that discussion. But when you use the word sister, it's a very important word, sister. We are brotherly relationship. Because, and that's the final point, because when we speak about relationship between the United States and Europe, it's not just about security. It's not just about defense. It's not just about military cooperation, and including the base of AZOST here and the cooperation and defense agreement that I'm so proud to have signed 30 years ago. It's not just about defense and about the economy. It's about people. And you, the mayors of Lisbon, of Portugal, and the mayors of the United States, you have a great role to promote that understanding that goes beyond politics, goes among our families and our people. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Senhoras e senhores, convosco, o presidente da Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, Nuno Moraes Sarmento.
Sua Excelência, o Sr. Presidente da República, Sr. Presidente da Assembleia Legislativa da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Sr. Presidente do Governo Regional dos Açores, Dr. José Manuel Bolieiro, Sr. Embaixador de Portugal nos Estados Unidos, Embaixador Francisco Duarte Lopes, Consul dos Estados Unidos em Ponta Delgada, Cônsul Margaret Campbell, Senhores Secretários Regionais, Sr. Presidente da Câmara Municipal de Ponta Delgada, Dr. Pedro Nascimento Cabral, Dr. José Manuel Durão Barroso, Senhora Juíza Conselheira do Tribunal de Contas, Senhores Deputados à Assembleia Legislativa da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Senhores Comandantes do Comando Operacional dos Açores e da Zona Marítima dos Açores, Senhores Presidentes de Câmara, dear Mayors and Representatives, caros amigos, dear friends. Também no encerramento, como aconteceu na sessão de abertura, e depois de uma palavra simples de agradecimento a todos e a cada um dos presentes, por terem afinal transformado aquilo que era apenas uma ideia numa realidade, pela adesão, pela participação e entusiasmo com que viveram estes dias, com a vossa compreensão, neste momento de balanço e de despedida, voltarei a falar em inglês para mais fácil acompanhamento pelos nossos convidados dos Estados Unidos. I will keep my remarks short, as we already had the pleasure to count with an important reflection of Dr. Durão Barroso. Actually, as he mentioned, this month marks the 3rd anniversary of the signature of the Defence Cooperation Agreement between Portugal and the United States that is signed for the Portuguese government. So it is especially timely to count on him here today, to listen and, as always, to learn something from his reflections. But first of all, because we are joined today in this closing session by His Excellency, the President of the Portuguese Republic, and I do not want to delay the opportunity to hear from him, from his always inspiring and guiding words. So I will be brief, but as we bring this summit to a close, I could not leave without first returning to what brought us together and to take stock. Second, to remember all that made this event possible. This afternoon, I can say with confidence that both goals have been met, at least their first but necessary steps. Of course, only time will tell if they are fully achieved in the long run, and that will be the real measure of our success today. But today, we can be sure that the important groundwork has been laid and that we are heading in the right direction. The development of this network is perhaps the clearest sign of this. This network, which you can now say we are building or rebuilding, is the result of relationships between cities, between communities, but more important, between pessoas. And I say it in Portuguese, it means people, of course, but I think the word pessoas captures a lot more. Some cities realized that they had not been in contact with their sister cities for too long. And this gathering has sparked a renewed awareness of the importance of those connections. Some had the chance to meet, perhaps for the first time, with their sister cities' representatives, creating an opportunity to rebuild ancient bonds. Equally important, I was happy to witness the beginning of another network within this broader sister cities network, the bonds between mayors and representatives of US cities who have a relationship with Portuguese cities. It is a network that is clearly emerging. Even last night, as I came down from the elevator, I didn't even need to see, I could hear perfectly, that group gathered at the bar speaking in English, of course, but with a very Portuguese mood around the table. I could say only the malassada was not there. But that's exactly what building a network looks like. Not just in formal sessions, but also in dinners that go on at the hotel bar or in lunches like the one you had today. We honestly didn't know most of you. FLAD had never reached out to many of the people in this room. Some of these conversations started a few months ago, but others just a few days back. And yet, we made it happen. Better saying, you all made it happen. When it comes to the second goal, the cooperation projects, we also have taken meaningful steps. Speaking for FLAD, we are taking home concrete ideas to work on and pursue. And I know many of you are as well. FLAD is set to make these relationships grow. It is part of our mission. And we have both the means and the will to do it. And in fact, I can say it's already underway. This summit was never intended to be an isolated initiative. It would be a contradiction in the very nature of the event if it was so. It only makes sense in the way it has been conceived as a part of a broader effort to strengthen the transatlantic link at the local level. The relationships we initiated here will be crucial to that mission. We now have each other contacts, a valuable resource. Let's use it. Let's keep exchanging ideas, sharing best practices, and monitoring the progress of the projects that emerge from these partnerships. And also, let's not be afraid to face challenges along this way. Setbacks are part of any long-term effort, and they too deserve our attention. For this purpose, today we will share a survey with all the participants. I ask everyone to take the time and give your sincere opinion. It's precisely to assess the result of the summit and to understand if and how we must pursue. So this survey is a key element for the future of this whole project. Therefore, we ask you, I underline, I insist, that you take 5 minutes before leaving. You don't need more than that. And then to leave the answered survey with any FLAD team member. And over the coming days, we will also share with all the representatives of cities and of sister cities organizations summaries and reflections from the cooperation panels. I encourage you to revisit them. Those are the sources of the real takeaways. This event was also a reminder that the strength of a sister city relationship does not depend on age, on how long it existed. First, we saw that age does not diminish energy. Cities like Tulare, whose sister city agreement with Angra will turn 60 next year, showed as much enthusiasm as recent partnerships like those between East Providence and Villafranca, or Minhola and Estarreja. These agreements were signed only months ago. In fact, the Villafranca East Providence agreement, from the Portuguese side of its formalization process, only days before this summit was ended. This shows us what is possible when momentum matched with commitment. Now, as we bring this summit to a close, I want to thank each of you for your presence, your time, your ideas, and above all for the open spirit you brought into every conversation. None of this would be possible without the enthusiasm and work of the almost 20 city representatives from the United States and roughly the same number of cities from Portugal who joined us for this initiative. Through your work, believe me, you are building something new but lasting. For these relationships to endure and flourish, they have to be supported by a strong civil society and a determined political leadership. And we also had good examples of both during the past couple of days. Now what is needed from all of us, and that's my final point, is another effort. An effort to engage the new generation of leaders in the United States and in Portugal in connecting our countries. That's a key priority for FLAD. Sister cities must offer a path forward for young people. They represent a way for the next generation of leaders in the United States and Portugal to connect through shared goals and innovative projects. As I finish, I switch to Portuguese. E faço para, na nossa língua, agradecer em primeiro lugar ao Governo dos Açores, na pessoa do seu Presidente, Dr. José Manuel Bolieiro, e destacando ainda o incansável trabalho do Dr. José Andrade, Diretor Regional das Comunidades. Foi um gosto fazer deste um projeto nosso. Só o compromisso e o entusiasmo do Governo dos Açores tornaram possível tanto do que vivemos e do que viveremos. Um agradecimento também especial ao embaixador de Portugal nos Estados Unidos, embaixador Francisco Duarte Lopes, que, não sei se, enfim, terão dado conta como eu, que acompanhou cada momento, mas eu digo cada momento sem uma falha, com permanente espírito de abertura e de disponibilidade para todas as perguntas e para todas as questões. Agradeço ainda ao Grupo Bem Saúde, na pessoa do Sr. Administrador, Dr. Carlos Medeiros, pelo acolhimento que nos permitiu sentir em casa. Um último agradecimento ao meu amigo Rui Marques, presente também em todos os momentos e figura central no dia de ontem, que sem ele não teria sido o mesmo. É notável como, pela sua presença e pelas suas palavras, nos inspira a trabalhar mais em conjunto, sempre construindo pontes. E à equipa da FLAD, aqui e em Lisboa, que trabalhou para fazer esta cimeira. Em especial é devido um agradecimento ao meu amigo David Lopes, comissário das celebrações dos 40 anos da FLAD, uma data muito importante para nós e que este ano celebramos. Caros amigos, dear friends, this summit has been only a part of those celebrations. So I hope that many of us will meet again very soon. And for that, I challenge you, each of you, to join us on October 11 at the iconic Carnegie Hall in New York for Amalia in America, a concert and a show that will close our 40th anniversary celebrations. Make sure you secure a ticket. This will be a celebration of cultural exchange that I hope will bring us together once again, this time through music. But it will be another dream come true, to feel the unique energy that I'm certain will result from bringing together the largest number of Portuguese descendants in the United States ever, and also those, as some of you, who engage daily with significant communities of Portuguese Americans. That is the ultimate network. And I end by returning to a thought I shared at the opening. The Atlantic is not a distance, it's a bridge. And over these past 3 days, I believe we started all walking across this new bridge and doing it together. Thank you and see you all very soon.
Senhoras e senhores, convosco, Sua Excelência, o Presidente do Governo dos Açores, José Manuel Bolieiro.
Uma muito boa tarde a todos e como anfitrião nos Açores, que alegria é ter-vos a todos nos Açores e nesta sessão. Sua Excelência, Senhor Presidente da República, Professor Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, Excelência, que enorme gosto é poder contar com a sua distinção, a distinção da sua pessoa e do Presidente da República aqui nos Açores e nesta sessão. Muito obrigado por ter colocado na sua agenda esta oportunidade. Magnífica reitora da Universidade dos Açores, anfitriã neste magnífico espaço dos Açores para o ensino superior de Portugal. Senhor Presidente da Assembleia Legislativa da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Excelência, Senhor Presidente da Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, Senhor Dr. João Manuel Durão Barroso, que gosto foi ouvir mais uma vez uma lição sobre a situação do mundo e o papel importante dos Açores nos instantes também da sua vida. Muito obrigado pela lição. Sou deputado ao Parlamento Europeu, Senhora Juíza Conselheira do Tribunal de Contas, Senhoras e Senhores Membros do 14º Governo dos Açores, Senhor Presidente da Câmara Municipal de Ponta Delgada, Senhoras e Senhores Deputados à Assembleia Legislativa da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Senhora Presidente do Conselho Económico e Social dos Açores, Senhor Presidente da Associação de Municípios da Região Autónoma dos Açores, Senhor Embaixador de Portugal nos Estados Unidos da América, Senhora Cônsul dos Estados Unidos da América nos Açores, Senhoras e Senhores Administradores da Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, entidades autárquicas, académicas, militares, das forças de segurança e representativas dos diversos organismos governamentais e não governamentais, representantes das ordens profissionais e cônsules honorários acreditados nos Açores, distintos convidados, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. Allow me speak in Portuguese. I trust in the simultaneous translation that it's helping for who doesn't speak in Portuguese. I'm sorry by that, but I will speak in Portuguese. É com grande orgulho que me dirijo a vós, desta feita, na sessão de encerramento, para vos felicitar pelo sucesso que tem sido esta muito digna iniciativa da FLAD no âmbito da celebração dos seus 40 anos de existência. Um dos conteúdos celebrativos, eu direi, mais bem concebidos e envolventes, quer das geografias, quer das histórias comuns, quer ainda da projeção futura que já antevamos, quiçá, mais desafiante e estimulante. Aliás, como boa consequência deste encontro a meio do Atlântico, aqui nos Açores. Renovo a minha felicitação à FLAD, na pessoa do seu presidente, Dr. Nuno Moraes Sarmento, pelo aniversário e por vincar a sua visibilidade nos Açores, à qual visibilidade nos associamos e nos associaremos sempre e colaborativamente. Ambos, eu como Presidente do Governo dos Açores e o Presidente da FLAD, vimos confirmada a importância que cimeiras como esta se constituem como plataformas indispensáveis para o fortalecimento das relações entre Portugal e os Estados Unidos da América, entre as nossas cidades e vilas, que se consolida através de cooperação e, sim, é preciso dizê-lo, da amizade. Permitam-me que me reserve nesta breve intervenção a falar-vos dos Açores, naturalmente enfatizando com orgulho a nossa realidade expressiva de identidade e reconhecimento. Em primeiro lugar, e a finalizar, também uma pincelada sobre o que já hoje projetamos para o futuro dos Açores, na sua contextualização sempre global, agindo, no entanto, localmente. Com orgulho, embevecido é certo, mas também com objetividade, porque, ancorado em provas internacionais de reconhecimento, falar-vos-ei então deste arquipélago e região. Região com autonomia política, que se distingue no Atlântico pela sua beleza, autenticidade e, acima de tudo, pelo seu compromisso com a sustentabilidade. Os Açores. Num mundo em que o turismo cresce exponencialmente, tornando-se por vezes uma ameaça aos próprios territórios que procuram celebrar, os Açores seguirão sempre e seguem um caminho diferente, um caminho exigente, mas profundamente necessário, o do turismo sustentável. Somos 9 ilhas que, apesar da distância geográfica entre si e do afastamento dos grandes centros continentais, assumiram o desafio de crescer em equilíbrio com a natureza. Assim, entendemos que preservar não é um luxo, é uma obrigação para com as futuras gerações e para com a nossa identidade. Somos uma referência internacional em sustentabilidade, em terra e no mar. E queremos confirmar sempre esse estatuto em cada ano, em todo o tempo. Os Açores foram o primeiro arquipélago do mundo, em 2019, a obter a certificação de destino turístico sustentável, segundo os critérios da WorldCheck, que é, afinal, um reconhecimento internacional que atesta o compromisso com práticas ambientais, sociais e económicas responsáveis. E este não é apenas um selo, é o reflexo de um trabalho coletivo que envolve o poder político, empresários, agricultores, pescadores, guias turísticos, escolas e cada cidadão que escolhe proteger em vez de explorar. Se fomos o primeiro, e isso foi e é um orgulho relevante, ainda mais significativo é o facto de sermos hoje o único arquipélago do mundo certificado com selo de ouro, pois esta certificação de base científica, que envolve a recolha e análise de cerca de 400 indicadores de sustentabilidade, é submetida a auditorias in loco anuais, numa cadeia hierárquica no valor dos selos, e nós fomos sempre subindo o reconhecimento a caminho do topo, que é o Master. Estamos hoje, ouro. Temos a sorte de viver num território onde o vulcão e o mar moldaram paisagens deslumbrantes. Lagoas em crateras antigas, fajãs que desafiam a gravidade, trilhos que serpenteiam entre hortênsias e um oceano vivo que acolhe mais de 20 espécies de cetáceos. De uma biodiversidade riquíssima. Mas é nossa responsabilidade garantir que esta riqueza natural não se perca sob o peso de um turismo inconsistente, aliás. Nos Açores, o turista é convidado a ser viajante, não consumidor. É chamado a respeitar os ritmos da natureza, a provar produtos locais, a envolver-se com comunidades genuínas, a caminhar em silêncio, a observar sem perturbar, a aprender em vez de distrair. Esta tem sido a nossa proposta. Um turismo com alma, onde a qualidade se sobrepõe à quantidade. Felizmente, isso tem sido reconhecido noutros planos do julgamento do feito e outros julgadores isentos. Evoco, telegraficamente, alguns destes reconhecimentos recentes. Açores distinguidos na categoria de Europe's Leading Adventure Tourism Destination, 2020. The 20 Best Places for Americans to Live, Invest, Work in Europe. To the Americans here. The places, Braga, Algarve e Açores, estão entre os 20 melhores destinos europeus para os norte-americanos viverem, investirem e trabalharem de acordo com critérios como a qualidade de vida e do sistema de saúde. Em 2022, um dos melhores destinos de ciclismo da Europa. Eis uma mobilidade amiga do ambiente. Pelo terceiro ano consecutivo, os Açores ganharam o prémio de melhor destino de aventura da Europa, em 2022, pelos World Travel Awards. Em 2023, a revista Condé Nast Traveler elegeu os Açores como top 10 das melhores ilhas da Europa e ganhamos o prémio de melhor destino de aventura do mundo, igualmente pelos World Travel Awards. Este ano, 2025, vimos publicitado o reconhecimento de melhor destino de turismo de aventura da Europa de 2024 e melhor destino de aventura do mundo, também 2024. Sim, é um orgulho. Para nós, o desenvolvimento sustentável não é inimigo do progresso, é o seu aperfeiçoamento. E os Açores têm provado que é possível crescer com responsabilidade. O investimento na mobilidade elétrica, o incentivo à agricultura biológica, a proteção de reservas marinhas e a formação contínua dos profissionais do setor são exemplos concretos desta aposta. Senhor Presidente da República, senhoras e senhores, o mundo precisa de faróis. E os Açores são hoje um desses faróis. Um território que mostra que é possível fazer diferente e fazer melhor. Que a sustentabilidade não é um obstáculo, mas uma vantagem competitiva. Que respeitar a terra, o mar e o espaço é a melhor forma de nos valorizarmos. Em matéria de proteção do oceano, os Açores estão a liderar no mundo pelo exemplo. Leading by example. A Conferência das Nações Unidas sobre os Oceanos reconhece a liderança no cumprimento, aliás, antecipado dos ODS, os Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável das Nações Unidas. Os ecossistemas dos oceanos estão avançando e avançados que estão, mas também muito ameaçados, devido às alterações climáticas, à poluição e à exploração intensiva. O Mar dos Açores contém valores naturais ímpares que devem ser protegidos. As políticas nacionais e internacionais definem metas de 30% de proteção. 2020 foi a Estratégia Europeia para a Biodiversidade. 2021, a Estratégia Nacional do Mar 2030. Em 2022, o quadro da biodiversidade Coming Montreal da ONU. Nos Açores, não nos limitamos a seguir, colocamos-nos à frente, lideramos. A rede das áreas marinhas protegidas nos Açores é a maior do Atlântico Norte e é, no nosso entender, o instrumento mais eficaz para a proteção e recuperação da vida marinha. A utilização da melhor informação científica, e aqui também com a ajuda da Universidade dos Açores, e o envolvimento da comunidade garantem a sua adequada implementação e gestão, na qual deposito enorme expectativa e certeza. O futuro que projetamos para os Açores é o de ser relevante, respeitado, reconhecido, valorizado, igualmente remunerado pelo ativo e património de natureza que o é para o país, para a Europa e para o mundo. Sim, somos grandiosos e importantes nos domínios territoriais, não no terrestre. Este sim, exíguo e ultraperiférico, igualmente no demográfico. Mas uma visão por quem valoriza o mar e o espaço e a eles associa ciência, investigação, inovação, tecnologia, sustentabilidade e solidariedade intergeracional, confirma a nossa grandiosidade. Que ambicionemos uma economia valorativa em substituição de uma mera economia extrativa. Visamos ser atores e beneficiários de políticas futuras da economia azul, da economia espacial e das mudanças climáticas e tecnológicas a elas associadas, num devir em que as transições climática, energética e digital interessam a todos e ninguém delas deve estar excluído. Na arte da comunicação digital, a nossa geografia e o nosso mar, profundo, em larga área da zona económica exclusiva, tem valor na travessia transatlântica de cabos submarinos de fibra óptica inteligentes, cada vez mais premente. E uma grande empresa do mundo nos Estados Unidos já descobriu essa importância. Tudo isso é devir, desafio e oportunidade de progresso para os Açores. Como destino turístico que somos, convido-vos não apenas a visitar os Açores, mas a compreendê-los, a viver a sua natureza, a ouvir os seus silêncios, a reconhecer nas nossas gentes um exemplo de equilíbrio entre tradição e modernidade. Os Açores não querem ser apenas um destino de viagem, querem ser um modelo do futuro, um laboratório do futuro. Quanto às nossas relações transatlânticas, repito a citação que na abertura deste summit fiz, citando o escritor açoriano Daniel de Sá. A comunidade não é só vizinhança, é construção de um futuro conjunto. No turismo sustentável, na cooperação científica do Atlântico, nas energias renováveis, nas tecnologias marinhas, nos nichos tecnológicos de comunicação, no digital. Confio que os saberemos concretizar. Nós, o deste lado do Atlântico, vós no outro lado. E os Açores, no meio, a fazer a ligação. Desejo a melhor continuidade do perfil de trabalho aqui iniciado. Acompanho a disponibilidade do Presidente Nuno Moraes Sarmento, Presidente da FLAD. Bem-ajam e cá nos voltaremos a ver.
Senhoras e senhores, convosco, Sua Excelência, o Presidente da República, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa.
Senhor Presidente da Assembleia Legislativa Regional, Senhor Presidente do Governo Regional, magnífica Reitora, nossa anfitriã, bem-aja por acolher este grande momento de amizade luso-americana, Senhor Embaixador de Portugal no Estado da América, Senhora Cônsul do Estado da América aqui nos Açores, senhores deputados, senhores membros do Governo Regional, uma palavra muito, muito especial, mas como vou falar dele adiante, a esse mestre do pensamento e da oratória chamado José Manuel Durão Barroso. Queridos amigos autarcas, presidentes de Câmara, quer açorianos, quer portugueses não açorianos, quer norte-americanos, Senhor Presidente da FLADA, outra palavra muito, muito especial, voltarei a isso mais adiante, para lhe agradecer o convite, teimoso, porque eu estava em África, tinha acabado de estar em São Tomé, depois Angola, depois Moçambique, acabo de chegar de Moçambique, que não é propriamente uma relação de vizinhança imediata, para vir para os Açores. Queridas amigas, queridos amigos açorianas e açorianos. Dear friends coming from the United States of America, you are at home. Eu vou começar por dizer, e por isso regresso aos Açores, ao Sr. Presidente do Governo Regional, que fez uma lindíssima peça, não apenas de conteúdo, mas de forma, um grande discurso literário, que os Açores são, para nós portugueses, uma evidência como paraíso na Terra. Nós sabemos isso. Felizmente, muitos norte-americanos sabem isso, muitos luso-americanos sabem isso, muitos luso-açorianos sabem disso. Eu estou a olhar ali para o Sr. Presidente da Câmara de Ponta Delgada e a recordar que, não o citei, os portugueses adoram uma lista imensa de vocativos. Mas merece protocolarmente. E, de facto, disse porque é que os Açores são um paraíso. Uma parte não é mérito seu, nem do Governo Regional, nem dos sucessivos Governos Regionais, a natureza. Ganhou com o bom senso, a visão e a capacidade de construir o futuro, mas verdadeiramente é única. É única. Na localização, na forma como se distribui pelas 9 ilhas, na diversidade das ilhas, é única. Mas depois constrói-se. Depois faz-se e refaz-se todos os dias. Isso é mérito humano. E eu queria felicitar nos governantes açorianos, e aqui em particular no Presidente do Governo Regional, esse refazer do tesouro que é os Açores, que são os Açores. Depois, o Sr. Presidente da Fundação Luso-Americana. O Sr. Presidente da Fundação Luso-Americana concebeu uma celebração destes 40 anos de uma riqueza excepcional. Eu estive desde o primeiro momento na abertura do ciclo. Lá estarei na segunda-feira para receber os legisladores norte-americanos num diálogo que é um diálogo anual, que bem conhece o Dr. Durão Barroso. Mas foi mais longe. E o exemplo de hoje é verdadeiramente paradigmático. Porque o tema é as cidades geminadas, os municípios geminados, através dos seus autarcas e dos povos que representam. Isso é ir às raízes. Quem fez poder local, eu fiz poder local. Fui autarca em Lisboa, a maior autarquia, em Cascais, uma autarquia grande, e na mais pobre autarquia do país, na altura, Celurico de Basto. Terra das minhas raízes. E verdadeiramente é uma ideia genial juntar aqueles que representam o povo, as populações, e não apenas os políticos, os homens e as mulheres de negócios, os economistas, os estrategas, juntá-los e juntar aquilo que foi uma geminação feita por açorianos e americanos. Açorianos que partiram para os Estados Unidos e comunidade americana que os acolheu, integrou. E hoje formam uma só comunidade. Agradeço-lhe imenso por esta iniciativa, devidamente compreendida e apoiada pelo Governo Regional e as autoridades açorianas. Depois, eu falei no Dr. Durão Barroso. O Dr. Nuno Moraes Sarmento também foi, à sua maneira, meu aluno. Mas o Dr. Durão Barroso fez-me ficar hoje muito feliz. Porque costuma dizer-se que os muito bons professores são os capazes de criar alunos ainda melhores, muito melhores. É o caso. É o caso dele, muito melhor do que eu, e é o meu caso, muito bom professor. Eu quebro assim a minha modéstia habitual. Usually I'm very humble. I don't use to say I'm a very good teacher, professor, whatever you want, lecturer. But you had to prove. The former Prime Minister, the former Chairman of the European Commission, someone that is an example of a breach between the United States and Europe and the United States and Portugal. All over the world. He belongs to the world. I'm a very good professor. I'm very good. I could not have imagined it in 73, 74, 75, but it happened. I was very young, but he was even better than I was and I am. That's very good. And for the President of Portugal, it's so good to have someone like Mr. Durão Barroso. So I had promised to speak in Portuguese. Usually it's what happens with the Portuguese president, but I'm trying to explain in English what I add to his remarkable speech. It was remarkable. As an analysis of the recent past, the present, and the next future. Remarkable. And I would add 3 or 4 ideas. And then a final reflection on the Portuguese role today in the relations between Europe and the United States. And there it's the president to speak. It's no longer the political science professor or the constitutional law professor. The first remark is a mistake that was made by so many people in the States and in Europe when they said Russia is no longer a key problem, geopolitical problem for the United States and for Europe. Even President said it. Even President Obama said it at the point. It's China. Russia had been downgraded into a regional power. It's no longer an enemy. It's no longer NATO's enemy. It is Daesh, it is ISIS, it's the terrorism. It is China, but not Russia. It's true that Russia lost power. It's no longer the Soviet Union. It's true it's no longer a global power, but it's a very strong regional power. No longer influential in Latin America or in Asia, but still very, very strong in Europe, Eastern Europe, in the Mediterranean, in Near East and Middle East, in Africa, Northern Africa, and a little bit everywhere in Africa. In the center of Africa, even in the south of Africa. That was a mistake. Now we admit it. We were very light when examining and analyzing the situation. Because Russia would always want to recover the status of a global power. think of the history of Russia, of the empire, some countries are imperialists, others are not. Russia, obviously, is imperialist. Would always try to enlarge its regional influence in Europe, in Southern Europe, in Northern Africa, in near Middle East, wherever it was possible. First mistake. Second mistake, as Prime Minister and the European Commission Chairman stressed, to believe that the fact of China being a strong enemy is more important than today's situation concerning Russia. Even before the invasion of Ukraine, obviously after the invasion of Ukraine, even before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was using cyber war against Western Europe, against the European Union. Russia was using the weaknesses of party systems and political systems in Europe, promoting, financing, and helping radical new movements and parties. It was an indirect strategy through proxies, but existed until the moment of the invasion. It was obvious. And it was a permanent action for years and years and years. But more than that, acting in Near East and Middle East, in the Mediterranean, throughout this period, when people believed Russia is no longer what it used to be, or Soviet Union used to be, we knew how Russia was influenced through advisors, selling weapons in Central Africa, in Southern Africa, present, not giving up the idea of going back to the status of global power. So the fact of China emerging does not mean that Russia was no longer worrying Europe, worrying the United States, creating challenges to both of them, But more than that, China was emerging. How? Being all over the world economically, expanding economically. One of the areas of expansion was the former Soviet republics in Asia, taking key positions there, taking advantage of the conflict, first potential, and now a real conflict between Russia and Europe and the States. Whenever with this war in Ukraine, Russia wins power, wins space, wins influence, it means indirectly China wins power, wins space, wins influence. Trying to appear as neutral, but not being neutral. Because this war in Ukraine is damaging Europe and obviously the United States, damaging in the beginning Russia, and going on damaging Russia. This means who is winning? China. If the states are really convinced that China is enemy number one, then they must pay attention to what is happening in Ukraine and in European security. Someone is winning, and that someone is not the states, it's China. Third mistake, the idea that one can be at the same time ally or a non-ally, half ally. This is today very real. I mean, for 2 years, there was an alliance involving European countries, European Union, other European countries, other non-European countries, and United States of America. And the United States of America, obviously, because it is number one as superpower, the real superpower, was essential for the alliance. One thing was the alliance without the United States, the other one is with the United States. If the United States, in the present or in the future, decides to change its position from someone fighting in Ukraine, against Russia, to become a referee is neutral, a referee between two teams, instead of trying to score with the allies, then there is a radical change in the balance of the war and of the geopolitics. One cannot be at the same time playing for a team and being the referee of the game. It's impossible. It's impossible. One cannot be wanting someone to win or lose and trying to appear as above that game, not involved in the game, because there is no political reason, no interest, no economic interest, and so on and so on. It's a radical change of position. You can, for a while, feign you are not changing your position, but Russia understood it. And the sign that Russia understood it is that what appeared to be an easy agreement for a ceasefire became a problem for 6 months. It was just a telephone call. So many calls, and Russia doesn't give up. The conditions are tough. Because for Russia, it's easy to understand that this change of position could mean something Russia could use. Be a tougher concerning the armed forces of Ukraine. No armed forces in Ukraine. No military help of Europeans in Ukraine, Ukrainian territory. No American help in Ukraine. Never accept the idea of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. Never. And with Ukraine, of course, other countries, Moldova, who knows, Georgia, and so on. Western Balkans, where Russia has strong proxies. And this creates a problem because people believe trying to make an agreement, they are really trying their best, and then they discover they cannot do it because Russia thinks it's not enough. Wants more territory and wants another balance of power, military power in Europe, that would mean less security and less peace for Europe and for Western Hemisphere. It's a mistake. It's a mistake. Of course, as Dr. Drombarrow said, it's possible to have a ceasefire. It's possible and wishable to build peace, but not sacrificing the values and the principles, and not sacrificing preconditions that are essential, not just for Ukraine, not just for Ukrainian president or government or armed forces, but for European Union, for the neighbors of Ukraine, for the non-neighbors of Ukraine. We used to say, everywhere in the European Union, our border is Ukrainian's border. what is happening there means we are suffering the attack and disputing and trying to decide and solve the problem of the future in Europe. Another mistake, to believe that the United States can be independent from what is happening in Europe. I mean, let us admit that things do not really evolve in a positive way. It's an European problem. I found that position, not just in some American friends, but in other continents. African friends saying, well, it is an European war between two neighbors. Two neighbors. I mean, a war that involves a superpower used to involve. Powers like European Union and Russia and other political powers. It's just an European war. It's a global war. A global war. People are playing there a kind of a game that can decide the future of the balance of power in the world for very long. It's not a problem of two countries, of two cultures, of two people, even less of two leaders. It's much more than that. It's a kind of mistake we cannot make. Another mistake, the opposite, the Europeans believing it's possible to solve the problem of Ukraine without the United States, of European security without the United States. Even if Europe does invest and should invest more in European zone defense and security. Even so, a realistic approach shows this kind of alliance was not just a fact of the post-war, of Soviet Union, of bipolar world. No. NATO is not obsolete as a formula for peace. That's why here in Azores it's easy to understand. And we Portuguese for very long say there is a southern flank in NATO, not just a northern or an eastern flank. And there is a western flank when the vessels of Russia cross the Atlantic, and sometimes of China. And when Russia and China look at Azores and think how interesting it is to have a foot in Açores. And when I say Açores, also we in São Tomé e Príncipe, or other islands in the middle of the ocean, but those in the southern hemisphere. Or when the Chinese appear saying we want to make research. It's so interesting, the sea of Açores. It is true, it's very interesting, because it's the best in the protection of nature. But they are not thinking of the protection of nature. They are thinking of a strategy of going into Azores and being there, because they know that Azores is a key point for space center, naval center, navy center. They know it. Strategical. It's easy just to look at the map and see. Any child in the beginning of the, I wouldn't say the first year, second year, third year of studies, look at it and says, it's obvious. It's a key point between Europe and the United States. All those mistakes are going on nowadays. And we should not try not to see they are mistakes. If the Russians are subtle, we must be even subtler. If sometimes in the United States people believe they can become a referee and letting Europe down in Ukraine, it's a mistake. If some Europeans think they can really achieve without the United States, it's a mistake. And now the final point. I should say it in Portuguese, but I start in English and then finish in Portuguese. It's in Portugal and the Açores. You know, American friends, everything about Portugal. We were the first neutral country to recognize your independence. In spite of having an alliance of hundreds of years with the English. The English were very important for us to keep our independence from what is now Spain and a brother country. It was not a brother, at least not really a nice brother, so many centuries ago. In spite of having this alliance, today 650 years alliance, we recognize the United States. The first ambassador to be appointed was a Portuguese, close friends of Jefferson. The consulate here was the first one, not in Europe, in the world. The community formed by both of us is a community of 1.5 million, going to 2 million people. You know what are the ties between Portugal and the United States, specifically between Açores and the United States. We know it. You know it. I must admit that with President Obama, at the point he had an Azorean as photographer. So we had the opportunity, the four of us, the couple, the photographer and myself, to debate Açores and to speak of the wonders of Açores with Obama. But more interesting, when I was in the White House with Donald Trump, 2018, one of the subjects that really were very worrying for the Portuguese president, for the Portuguese government, was the fact that some people thought that the states should leave Lajes, should leave Açores. There was a trend saying, first of all, the families, and then the armed forces, one by one, because it's no longer strategic. It's to deny reality. Anyway, it was a fashion. Even in the Pentagon, even in the Congress. And I was amazed because one of the issues I discussed with President Trump was this one. And about it, at that time, 2018, he was very clear. Obviously, it is vital for us. I decided to breathe much better, deeply, deeper. Wow. Although I'm really a believer, it was a miracle. Obviously a miracle. Two different presidents really understood how important were Açores. Now, and when I say now, it's in a global sense, a vague sense, I mean, after 2018, so many occasions showed that it still goes on being a vital strategic position for the transatlantic relationship for the States, for Europe, for Portugal, and for Açores, obviously. And this is very good. And so we're coming to the position of Portugal. Why are we so strong? And the Azorian people show it. Because we are everywhere in the world. We were the first in Europe to leave Europe and to cross the oceans. Why? We had just a neighbor, a strong neighbor. Not so nice. So we had to choose either the sea or the neighbor. Guess what? We chose the sea. We chose the sea. And now we are happy because the first to follow us was the neighbor. And now we are in the same boat. That is called Europe. That is called NATO. That is called transatlantic relation. No disputes. But we were the first to see it. They are clever, but we are even a little bit cleverer. This means we are very good as a platform between continents, oceans, cultures, civilizations. We adapt easily to any kind of climate. We adapt to speaking all the languages of the world, to eat all the kind of food everywhere where we live. That's the way we are. That makes us very strong. We had a chairman of the European Commission. And the other day I said on a speech, we are the only country not being a founder of the European Union, the European Community at that time, none of those 6 that had already, first, the President of the European Commission, now the President of the European Council. No one else. The 2 of them. There was a country, an Eastern country, that had one President of the European Council. But no one had a President of the European Commission, as we had, not being a founder. Of course. It's a very special person. But that means that we are a very special country. Also. And Azores is a very good example of this. A very good example of a bridge between different continents. A bridge, a human bridge. Not just a political bridge, economic bridge, business bridge. Human bridge. That's why the culture of Açores is very different from other cultures inside Portugal. Not just because there are those 9 islands and the sea, and they are in connection with 2 continents. Permanent connection. You can see in Azores. Even before the digital, you could see, and you had telecommunications with the 2 continents. You saw both the TVs, the American TVs and the European TVs. That's very special. The Azorians are very special. We cannot lose this. We are not going to lose it. That's one of the differences in Europe of Portugal. Many other countries in Europe are very important. But very few have the presence we have everywhere all over the world. And the Azorians are an example you can understand and witness every day. Well, I was too long. I said I would try to be short, now I was too long. This to say, we learned a lot with Durão Barroso. He's really unique. We must thank Nuno Moraes Charmente, Flawed President. He's also very clever. Of course, comparing with Durão Barroso, it's difficult. They are both very good, but no. Both of us cannot really win this kind of war. But you are special, and you do understand how important are those 40 years of flood. And then Azores. Well, I envy you. Being President Republic of the Portugal Republic, I envy you as President of Açores. Wow. Being President of a paradise is better than being President of almost paradise. That is Portugal. Almost paradise. With few problems. Thank you very much. Let us go on fighting for our friendship forever. Portugal, United States, with Azores in between. Thank you.
Em nome de Sua Excelência o Presidente da República, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, e agradecendo desde já a presença de todos, declaro encerrada a cimeira Sister Cities Summit. Muito boa tarde a todos.